Have you ever begged your mind to be quiet, only to hear it get even louder? Have you ever wondered why the harder you chase peace, the more it slips through your hands? Welcome back to the channel. If you clicked on this because life feels noisy inside your head, you are in the right place. Today I want to share a Zen-flavored story that looks simple on the surface but keeps unfolding the longer you sit with it. The heart of it is this: when you try to force the mind to be empty, you often create more struggle. But when you learn to stop feeding the mind, it begins to settle on its own. And the second message is even more practical. The moment you stop clinging to every thought, you start seeing your life clearly enough to choose wisdom and a calmer destiny. Let me tell it like a story, because stories slip past the defenses that arguments cannot. There was a time when I believed the mind was like a broken radio. It kept talking, even when I did not want it to. It replayed old conversation, predicted future disasters, compared my life to everyone else, judged my mistakes like a strict accountant, and narrated my day as if I was failing a test I did not remember signing up for. Some mornings, the noise started before my feet touched the floor. Other nights, it was still talking after the lights went out. I tried everything that seemed reasonable. I read productivity advice and made lists. I cleaned my room like order on the outside could fix chaos on the inside. I distracted myself with videos, music, games, endless scrolling, anything that could drown out the inner voice. Sometimes it worked for an hour, sometimes for a day, but the mind always came back, and it came back hungry. Then one day, after a stretch of stress that made my shoulders feel like they were made of stone, I heard someone say a sentence that irritated me at first because it sounded too easy. Empty your mind. I remember thinking, sure, and while I am at it, I will also stop the ocean from making waves. But that sentence stayed with me, not because it was helpful, but because it was annoying in a way that felt suspiciously true. It haunted me through a week of bus rides, deadlines, and that quiet background pressure that says you should be further ahead by now. So I did what a restless person does when they are desperate for relief. I went searching for a method. I found advice that sounded like battle plans. Control your thoughts. Eliminate distraction. Force discipline. Crush the mind into silence. I tried that approach for exactly one evening, and it was a disaster. I sat down, closed my eyes, and ordered my mind to shut up. It immediately did the opposite. Thoughts multiplied like they were protesting. Memories rose like bubbles. I started noticing every itch, every sound, every worry I had been ignoring. I felt angry at myself for failing at peace. Then I felt guilty for being angry. Then I felt tired of feeling guilty. The whole thing turned into a messy loop. I opened my eyes and stared at the wall, feeling defeated. That is when a very ordinary moment became the beginning of the real lesson. A neighbor knocked on my door. I almost ignored it. I wanted to stay inside my mood. Because sometimes the mind treats suffering like a private room. It does not want anyone to enter. But I opened the door anyway. My neighbor was an older man, the kind who carried calm like it was a natural scent. He asked if I could help carry a box to his car. It was not heavy, just awkward. I said yes, followed him downstairs, and helped him load it. As we walked back, he looked at my face and said, "You look like someone wrestling an invisible tiger." I laughed, partly because it was accurate, partly because it was strange to be seen so clearly. I told him, "My mind will not stop. I tried meditation, and it just got worse." He nodded like he had heard that sentence 1,000 times. Then he said, "You tried to empty the mind the way people try to flatten water with their hands." I did not understand. He looked at me and said, "Come tomorrow morning. Bring a cup." I almost did not go. Because when you are stressed, even simple invitations feel like extra work. But something in his voice was not pushy. It was steady. And I had reached that point where I was willing to try anything that did not involve fighting myself. The next morning I met him in a small garden behind the building. It was nothing special, just a patch of green that survived between concrete schedules. Birds were making small, casual sounds like they were gossiping about nothing. The air was cool enough to wake the skin gently. He had a teapot and 2 cups. He poured tea slowly, like time was not a threat. Then he handed me a cup and said, "Hold it with both hands." I did. He said, "What is in your cup?" I said, "Tea." He smiled. "And what is in your mind?" I said, "Thoughts." He nodded. "Now try to empty your cup without tipping it." I stared at him. He said, "Go on." I held the cup and tried to imagine emptying it without moving it. It was impossible. He said, "Now try to empty your mind without changing anything." I felt the message land, but I still did not fully understand. So I said, "What am I supposed to do then?" He placed his own cup down on a flat stone. The surface was calm. He dropped a small pebble into the cup. The tea rippled. Then, without touching the cup, he waited. The ripples settled. The tea became still again. He said, "You do not flatten ripples by punching the tea. You let it settle by not disturbing it." Then he looked at me and said, "The mind is like this. Thoughts are ripples. When you fight them, you disturb the tea. When you chase them, you disturb the tea. When you judge them, you disturb the tea. When you feed them with stories, you disturb the tea." He paused and added, "Emptying the mind is not making thoughts disappear. It is stopping the habit of stirring." I sat there holding my cup like it had suddenly become a teaching tool instead of a drink. Let me tell you a story, because your mind likes stories, and we might as well use that. He began speaking in a voice that did not try to impress. It just arrived, one sentence at a time, like steps on a path. A student went to a master and said, "My mind is crowded. Please teach me how to empty it." The master said, "Bring me a bucket." The student brought a bucket. The master took the bucket, filled it with water, and said, "Now empty it." The student poured the water out. The bucket was empty. The master immediately filled it again and said, "Empty it." The student poured again. The master repeated this many times until the student became annoyed. The student said, "Why do you keep filling it if you want it empty?" The master smiled and said, "I do not fill it. Life fills it. Wind fills it. Rain fills it. Rivers fill it. You are not in charge of whether water appears. You are in charge of whether you keep carrying old water you no longer need." The student did not understand. So the master said, "Every thought is water. Some water is fresh and useful. Some water is stale and heavy. You do not become wise by never having thoughts. You become wise by learning what to keep and what to pour out." Then the master added, "And the only way to know is to stand still long enough to taste what you are carrying." When I heard that, something inside me softened, because it was the first time someone had described my mind without shaming it. It was not, "You are broken." It was, "You are carrying water, and you have not learned when to set the bucket down." My neighbor looked at me and said, "Your mind is not your enemy. It is trying to protect you. It replays the past to prevent pain. It predicts the future to avoid danger. It compares you to others to help you survive. The problem is it does not know when to rest." He sipped his tea and said, "So we teach it rest?" I asked him, "How?" He said, "We begin with something humbler than emptying the mind. We begin with learning not to believe every thought." That sentence sounds small, but it is enormous. Because when you are stressed, thoughts feel like facts. A thought says, "You are failing," and the body responds like it is true. A thought says, "You will be rejected," and the heart tightens. A thought says, "You are behind," and the breath becomes shallow. Thoughts become commands. They become destiny. He said, "Today, we do one simple practice. When a thought arises, do not chase it. Do not fight it. Do not feed it. Label it gently as thinking. Then come back to the feeling of your hands holding the cup. That was it. No mystical language. No dramatic rituals. Just one action repeated. So we sat. At first, thoughts came like a crowd. Planning. Remembering. Judging. A little bit of anger. A little bit of embarrassment. I wanted to do it right, which is itself a thought that stirs the tea. I remembered his instruction. Thinking. Then I returned to the warmth of the cup. Another thought came. This is boring. Thinking. Back to the cup. Another thought came. You are wasting time. Thinking. Back to the cup. Another thought came. You will never be calm. Thinking. Back to the cup. Something surprising happened after a while. The thoughts still came, but they began to feel less sticky. They arrived, and they left, like birds passing through the sky, and the part of me that could watch them began to feel more stable, like a quiet ground beneath moving weather. My neighbor said softly, "You see, the mind empties itself when you stop filling it." Then he added, "There is another kind of emptiness too. The emptiness of ego. The emptiness of that constant story about me. My image, my fears, my control. When that story loosens, compassion appears." I asked him what he meant. He pointed to a small ant carrying a crumb across a stone. The ant struggled but did not complain. He said, "Look at that. It does not have your stories. It has a task. It has life." When your mind is full of self-centered noise, you forget the simple truth that all beings are carrying something. Then he said, "When you empty the mind, you do not become numb. You become available. You can finally notice others. You can finally act with kindness rather than react with fear." That day stayed with me. And not because it solved everything instantly. It stayed because it gave me a direction that was not based on force. Over the next weeks I practiced in small ways. On the bus, I would feel my feet and label thoughts as thinking. In a stressful conversation, I would notice the thought, "I must win," and label it as thinking. Then return to the sensation of breathing. When I was about to send a message driven by anxiety, I would pause and feel my hands. Label the story, then decide with more wisdom. Slowly, the inner noise began to change, not because I became a different person overnight, but because I stopped feeding certain loops. This is where karma becomes practical. What you feed grows. What you stop feeding weakens. Every time you return to breath, you plant a seed of steadiness. Every time you choose kindness over defense, you plant a seed of peace. Every time you let a thought pass without grabbing it, you plant a seed of freedom. One evening I had a particularly bad day. The kind of day where everything feels slightly wrong. Small problems stack. Someone misreads you. A plan falls apart. You feel tired and misunderstood. The mind loves days like that because it uses them as evidence that the whole world is against you. I sat down to practice and immediately felt the mind revolt. Thoughts came fast. I felt heat in my chest. I felt the urge to distract myself. Then I remembered the cup. I did not have tea that night, so I held a plain glass of water. It felt almost silly, but silliness can be a doorway too, because it breaks the pride that says practice must be dramatic. I held the glass. Thoughts arrived. Thinking. Back to the hands. Then a memory surfaced. Something old and sharp. My body reacted. The mind tried to build an entire movie around it. Usually I would have followed the movie. That night, I labeled it, remembering. Then I returned to the hands. The memory did not vanish, but it lost its grip. It became a scene, not a sentence. That is emptiness in action. Not empty like nothing matters. Empty like you are no longer trapped in a solid identity made of thoughts. Empty like you have room to breathe. As I practiced, I noticed another truth. Many of my thoughts were not even mine in the deepest sense. They were borrowed voices. A teacher from years ago. A comment someone made. A cultural pressure. A family expectation. a trend on social media. When the mind is full, it repeats these voices as if they are truth. When the mind quiets, you can finally ask, do I actually believe this? Or did I inherit it? That question is a form of awakening. I began to see how much of my stress came from clinging to an image. The image of being capable. The image of being liked. The image of being ahead. The image of being strong. Clinging to an image is exhausting because life refuses to stay still. Life changes. People change. Plans change. Bodies change. The more you cling, the more you suffer. So I started practicing a softer way. Instead of clinging to an image, I practiced values. I asked, in this moment, what would be wise? What would be kind? What would reduce suffering? What would create good causes? That shift was subtle, but it changed everything. Because images demand control. Values invite practice. Images make you afraid of mistakes. Values make mistakes into lessons. One afternoon I visited my neighbor again. He was watering plants. He looked at me and said, "How is your tiger?" I smiled. "Still there." He nodded. "Good. Now you are not afraid of it." I told him I still had days when my mind was loud. He said, "The goal is not to have no waves. The goal is to stop drowning." Then he gave me another story. Shorter this time. A monk was sweeping leaves. A young student asked, "How do you keep your mind so calm?" The monk kept sweeping and said, "I do not keep it calm. I return it." The student said, "Return it to where?" The monk said, "To this." And he lifted the broom slightly, as if the broom was the entire universe. That story sounded poetic, but it was also practical. Returning the mind to this means returning attention to what is happening now, without adding extra stories. Washing a dish, feel the water. Walking, feel the steps. Listening, feel the sound. Speaking, feel the intention. Breathing, feel the breath. The student in the story wanted a permanent calm. The monk offered a repeatable return. That is the path. Not a trophy, but a habit. As I kept practicing, I started noticing how emptiness and compassion are connected. When the mind is full of me, it cannot hold much else. But when the mind has space, it naturally notices others. It naturally softens. There was a day I was in line at a store, and the person ahead of me was frustrated, speaking sharply to the cashier. The old version of me would have judged then carried that irritation for an hour. That day, I noticed the irritation rise, thinking. Then I returned to breath. In that space, I saw something else. The frustrated person was not evil. They were stressed. They were carrying a bucket full of water and it was spilling. The cashier was tired. Everyone was tired. The whole scene was human. I felt a small compassion rise, and it changed my face. I relaxed my shoulders. When it was my turn, I spoke gently to the cashier. They looked relieved in a way that was almost invisible, but not completely. That is how practice works. It does not always change the world dramatically. Sometimes it changes one facial expression, one tone, one moment. But those small moments are causes, and causes become destiny. If you want to talk about fate, this is where it becomes real. Many people think fate is something written somewhere outside them. But your daily mind is writing your life, your reactions, your habits, your attention, your kindness, your bitterness, your patience, your greed, your generosity. These are ink. Emptying the mind, in the Zen sense, is not escaping the world. It is taking your pen back. Now let me bring you into a deeper layer. Because the phrase empty your mind can be misunderstood. Some people he written think it means suppress emotions. That is not wisdom. Suppression is just stuffing the bucket and pretending it is empty. The water is still there, and it will spill later. Then emptiness is more like spaciousness. It is the ability to feel emotions without being possessed by them. Sadness can arise. and you can breathe with it. Anger can arise, and you can watch it without feeding it into harmful speech. Fear can arise, and you can meet it with kindness rather than panic. This is where practice becomes compassionate toward yourself, because you stop calling yourself bad for having emotions. You start seeing emotions as signals, as waves, as condition. Then you respond wisely. I remember a night when I felt sadness with no clear reason. In the past, that would have scared me. I would have searched for a reason, then created a story, then made the sadness heavier. That night, I sat on my bed and said silently, "Sadness is here." I felt it in my throat and chest. I did not try to fix it. I breathed. I softened my face. I placed a hand on my chest, not as a performance, but as a quiet act of care. And then I remembered something my neighbor once said: "Be kind to the part of you that is hurting. It learned to hurt for a reason." That sentence changed how I related to myself, because it framed my pain not as a flaw, but as a history. The mind that worries learned to worry because it was trying to protect me. The mind that judges learned to judge because it was trying to keep me safe from rejection. The mind that replays mistakes learned to replay because it was trying to avoid future pain. When you see that, you stop fighting the mind like an enemy. You start training it like a frightened animal with patience. That is compassion. And compassion, strangely, is one of the fastest ways to quiet the mind. Not by force, but by safety. The mind becomes noisy when it feels threatened. When it feels safe, it settles. So I began practicing inner safety. A slower breath, gentler self-talk, fewer late-night spirals, more honest rest, better boundaries, less comparison, more time outside, more silence without fear. And the result was not a permanently empty mind, because that is not human. The result was a mind that returned faster, a mind that did not cling as tightly, a mind that could hold space. There is a reason Zen stories often include ordinary objects like cups, brooms, stone, and bowls, because awakening is not elsewhere. Awakening is here, in the ordinary, when you are fully present. Let me share one more story in the same spirit, because it captures the twist that many people miss. A student went to a teacher and said, "I want enlightenment." The teacher said, "Wash your bowl." The student said, "I already washed it." The teacher said, "Then, wash it again." The student said, "Why?" The teacher said, "Because you are still thinking about enlightenment while your bowl is in your hands. Be here, completely, and the mind will empty itself." The student did not understand, but they washed the bowl again, slowly, feeling the water, feeling the bowl, feeling the movement. And for a brief moment, there was only washing. In that moment, the student tasted something. A simple clarity, a quiet mind. Not because they achieved a spiritual trophy, but because they stopped chasing and started being. That is the secret hidden in plain sight. The mind becomes crowded when you treat the present as a hallway you rush through to reach some future relief. But when you treat the present as the place you actually live, the mind has less reason to scream. Now I want to make this personal for you, because I know you are listening from your own life, your own stress, your own internal noise. Maybe your mind is crowded with school pressure, family expectations, social drama, identity questions, fear about the future, regret about the past. Maybe you feel like you are always behind and never enough. Maybe you want to be calm, but you do not know how. I want you to hear this clearly. You do not need to force your mind to be empty. You need to stop stirring it. What does that look like in real life? It looks like noticing a thought, then not building a whole story from it. It looks like feeling an emotion, then not turning it into a verdict. It looks like pausing before reacting, even for one breath. It looks like returning to the body, the feet, the hands, the breath. It looks like choosing one kind action when the mind wants to be harsh. It looks like letting go of one argument you do not need to win. It looks like releasing one comparison you do not need to carry. It looks like forgiving yourself for being human. Because unforgiveness is one of the loudest forms of inner noise. And here is the part that ties it all together with wisdom and destiny. When you practice this repeatedly, you change your causes. And when you change your causes, you change your outcomes. Not perfectly, not instantly, but steadily. A mind that is less crowded makes fewer harmful choices. It speaks with more patience. It listens more deeply. It sees consequences more clearly. It apologizes sooner. It takes responsibility without self-hatred. It creates less conflict. It attracts healthier relationships. It experiences more peace even in the middle of problems. That is karma. That is lived experience. Cause and effect. Seed and fruit. I also want to say something about letting go. Because emptying the mind is not separate from letting go. They are the same movement from two angles. When you let go of a thought, the mind becomes a little more empty. When you let go of an identity, the heart becomes a little more free. When you let go of the need to control everything, life becomes a little more workable. Letting go does not mean you do not care. It means you stop choking life with your grip. One time my neighbor said something that sounded almost as simple, but it kept proving itself true. He said, "The mind is loud when the heart is clenched." So I started practicing unclenching the heart. When I noticed myself becoming defensive, I softened. When I noticed myself becoming jealous, I breathed and wished someone well. When I noticed myself becoming ashamed, I placed a hand on my chest and spoke kindly inwardly. When I noticed myself becoming impatient, I slowed down by 5%. Each time, the mind had less fuel. And here is the wild part. The more I practiced this, the more I felt a quiet joy appear sometimes. Not excitement, not entertainment, but a simple ease. The ease of not fighting reality every second. The ease of not carrying extra stones. The ease of being present. That is the kind of peace people search for in big achievements. But it is built from small returns. Now I want to close this story with a moment that still makes me smile. Because it shows how Zen teaching often arrives through humor. One morning I met my neighbor again. He was holding a cup. He said, "Today you will empty your mind in 10 seconds. I laughed. "Sure," he said. "Look at the sky." I looked up. "Blue, with a few clouds," he said. "Now tell me what you see." I said, "Sky, clouds." For those seconds, where was your problem? I paused. It was not gone. But it was not being fed. He smiled and said, "Exactly. The mind empties when attention returns to what is real." Then he added, "Do not chase 10 seconds. Just learn to return to 10 seconds. Again and again, until your life becomes made of return." That line stayed with me. A life made of returns. That is a beautiful definition of practice. Because we will drift. We will get lost in thought. We will get caught in emotion. We will claim. We will stir. That is human. The practice is not never drifting. The practice is returning. Returning is wisdom. Returning is humility. Returning is compassion. Returning is awakening. So if your mind feels crowded today, I want you to try something right after this video. Not a grand plan. Not a perfect routine. Just one small return. Hold a cup with both hands. Feel its warmth or its weight. Breathe once. Label the next thought as thinking. Come back to the cup. Do it 3 times. Then take that same skill into your next moment. Walking. Feel your steps. Eating. Taste your food. Listening. Hear fully. Speaking. Feel your intention before words come out. And when you inevitably get lost again, do not insult yourself. That insult is just another pebble in the cup. Smile gently and return. Now let me end in a way that brings it back to you. Because this channel is not just me talking. It is us practicing together. If this story touched something in you, tell me in the comments what your mind has been crowded with lately. Not the details if you do not want to share, but the theme. Worry, regret, anger, loneliness, pressure, comparison. And if you have a simple practice that helps you return, share it. Someone else reading might find exactly the lamp they needed. If you want more long-form stories and teachings like this, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and leave a comment to support the community. And if you want to support the channel even more, you can join the membership so we can keep making deeper content that helps people breathe, see clearly, and walk the path with compassion. Until next time, do not try to flatten the water with your hands. Set the stirring down, return to this, and let the mind settle by itself.